Hello, everyone, and welcome to our our July 2024 webinar, Under Pressure, Stress and Parkinson's. I'm Donna Greening, Parkinson Canada's Education and Program Innovation Coordinator. From coast to coast, Parkinson Canada acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territories of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. To access closed captioning, click on the CC Captions button and then click on Show Subtitle. We're always grateful for our expert speakers who join us to share their knowledge during our webinars. If you have questions about today's topic after the conclusion of the webinar, please contact your healthcare provider or Parkinson Canada's information and referral team. Any resources mentioned today will be included in our follow-up email, along with the link to a recording of the webinar, so there's no need to take notes. Please submit any questions you have for our presenters by typing them in the Q&A window found at the bottom of your webinar window. This helps us monitor them more effectively. Please avoid using the chat window to submit your questions, but feel free to use that chat window to say hello or talk amongst yourselves. When the webinar ends, please take a moment to fill out our survey, which we use to evaluate our programming, ensuring that we're delivering content that's relevant to the Parkinson's community. Now let's get started. Inspiring and helping others to lead a healthier lifestyle is a passion for Kim Mortson. Kim is a certified personal trainer, nutrition and wellness specialist, and older adult fitness pro trainer who has combined her qualifications, industry recognition, and personal enthusiasm to build her award-winning business, Body Design, since 2002. She is a former community ambassador for Lululemon, and she served as a co-chair of the Mount Albert Sports Day 5-kilometer run walk from 2014 to 2021. Kim was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in January 2018. However, she started experiencing symptoms 3 years prior to her diagnosis. Kim's Parkinson's progressed slowly until the spring of 2023. By December of that year, she found herself relying on a walker and/or a wheelchair for mobility. In January 2024, she had DBS surgery. Kim is married to Pete and is a proud nana to 4 grandchildren. Now, before she starts, I just want to add a quick note that her location is currently being affected by Hurricane Beryl, so we apologize in advance if the audio is affected at times. If that does end up being the case, we will have Kim re-record her segment and replace it in our final recording. And now, welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Donna, for that introduction and for the opportunity of participating in today's seminar or webinar on stress. As Donna mentioned, my Parkinson's disease was diagnosed in January 2018. However, I had symptoms for 3 years prior to my diagnosis. Initially, my first symptom was dystonia in my left foot, and then other issues appeared on the left side of my body. But I was very fortunate. My symptoms progressed relatively slowly for the next 5 years. However, last spring, all of that changed. I went from leading a fairly normal life with medications controlling my Parkinson's to my symptoms, which were dystonia, dyskinesia, and bradykinesia, quickly accelerating. By last December, I was using a walker and a wheelchair to get around most of my day. I only had 4 hours per day where I was relatively symptom-free. Impacted my life prior to my Parkinson's diagnosis and since then. I have been a business owner in the fitness industry for over 20 years, where I was managing a large number of clients and a team of over 10 people. My stress levels were very high, and I worked 7 days a week. When COVID hit in 2020, my business was severely impacted. We were shut down by the government, and then I had to move my team and clients online to continue running my business. This was another extremely stressful time. In 2021, my husband and I decided to sell our home, purchase the family cottage, and rebuild the cottage so it could become our year-round home. Due to COVID-related supply issues, we ended up moving 3 times in 1 year because the cottage rebuild took much longer than we anticipated. During that same time, my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer. We were now dealing with radiation treatments and many, many doctor's appointments. We finally moved into our new home in February 2022, and life seemed to settle down a little bit. However, in the spring of 2023, my mom passed away, and at the same time, we ended up having to deal with more construction issues on our new home due to the defective materials used during the original construction. My stress levels were again extremely high, dealing with the loss of my mom, upheaval in our lives with the construction, while still trying to run my business and our household. In March, my Parkinson's symptoms started to accelerate rapidly. By last summer, I had to give up my in-person personal training clients. It was just too exhausting, and I was having real troubles walking. Scaling back my business caused us to have a financial hit that we were not anticipating, which again added to my stress. Insomnia set in by September, which meant I was now not sleeping well, which in turn added more stress to my body. Socializing with friends became virtually impossible because of my dyskinesia or dystonia. In early December, I stopped driving my car, so isolation was an issue. And my symptoms had progressed to the point where I was now using a walker or a wheelchair to get around most of my day. I was also questioning my identity. Who was I now? My whole world had changed in less than a year. I had gone from being a physically active business owner, wife, mother, and grandmother to a woman who had to give up most of her business and was now using mobility aids to get around. It was a vicious cycle. The more my Parkinson's symptoms progressed, the more my stress levels went up. I was filled with fear and anxiety. I was not sleeping, and I was worried about my future. I am very fortunate to have a loving and very supportive husband. He is always so optimistic and positive. He kept saying to me, "Don't be a Debbie Downer," when he expressed negative thoughts. He always kept encouraging me to stay positive and look at the bright side of things. I have 2 sons. One son lives fairly close, but the other son lives in Alberta. Both sons were very concerned about me and my health. They stay in contact with me regularly, but I know they have their own responsibilities and families to take care of. In December, I learned I was scheduled for DBS surgery in late January. This was a turning point for me. I decided I wanted to be prepared for my surgery, as prepared for my surgery as possible. I hired Julie Thayer, a chronic physical and emotional pain specialist and a yoga instructor, to teach me stress management techniques prior to my surgery. I had been following her on social media for quite a while, and we had some mutual business colleagues. I knew I wanted the best possible outcome for my surgery, so I decided to focus on 3 things in preparation for my surgery. Number 1, I wanted to be in the best physical shape. I knew exercise helps deal with stress. It produces natural endorphins and it makes us feel better physically. I also knew that if my body was fit, I would heal faster with better results. I wanted to be mentally prepared. So I hired Julie to help me with different breathing techniques to promote relaxation, reduce tension, and get in touch with my body. I knew that I would be awake for part of my surgery, so I wanted to know that I could remain calm and help the surgeon by answering any questions during that part of the surgery. Julie also taught me meditations that helped me take my mind off things that were stressing me. The third piece that I worked on was getting in touch with my God. I had been brought up going to Sunday school and church, but had lost touch with my religion many years ago. I reconnected with my minister, and she would meet with me on Zoom to talk. She wrote prayers that were specifically for me. I still pray on a regular basis as I find it helps to know there is a higher power who I can give my problems to. There are other things, though, that I do to cope with stress. I get outside and I walk in nature. It feels good to breathe in the fresh air and listen to the wind. It clears my mind and makes me feel good. I'm a trainer. I do online classes. And since my DBS surgery, I've even started back running. This is something I did for over 20 years before my Parkinson's started. I also practice yoga once a week. During the winter, I do jigsaw puzzles. I like the mental challenge and it passes time. I spend time with my pets. I talk to my cats. When I lay down, Rudy, one of my cats, inevitably comes and lays down with me and he starts purring. I eat healthy meals. Good food makes me feel better, and I know that I'm taking care of my body. My husband and I signed up for a CSA program this spring. That's a farm produce sharing program. We're now receiving fresh organic vegetables each week, which we're really enjoying. I also gave up alcohol last January because I felt it was making my Parkinson's symptoms worse. I don't miss the alcohol, but I do have to watch the sugar content and many of the non-alcoholic coolers and wines. I've learned to reach out to family and friends. Last fall, I started calling people to connect. Next thing I knew people were asking to visit me or inviting me to get together during the afternoons to play Mexican Train. That's a dominoes game. I was also invited to join a book club. I had formed a community. It can be very scary to reach out, but it's well worth the effort. Another thing that I do to manage stress is focus on today. I can't dwell on the past because I can't change it. I don't look into the future because I don't know what's going to happen anyways. But what I can focus on is today and living in the moment. The biggest thing that has contributed to helping me manage my stress and have a positive outlook on life is practicing gratitude. Every night I go through my day and I think of all the wonderful things that have happened to me that day. This practice allows me to focus on the positives in my life rather than the negative. My Parkinson's symptoms have improved since learning to manage my stress more effectively. The change in my mindset has made the biggest improvement in my non-motor symptoms. I'm calmer. I live in today. I practice gratitude. I talk to my God. I take my daily life much slower, and I don't get as critical of myself or my situation. I say no if I feel my boundaries are being pushed. I'm back to working on my business, but I've set up very strict parameters on how much I can do in a day or even a week. Life is much more manageable and positive now that I practice stress management tools on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Kim. You've got such a great take the bull by the horns attitude for managing your stress, and you've shared so many great tips with everyone. Thank you so much. We are now going to hear from Dr. Rick Helmich, consultant neurologist and associate professor in the neurology department of Radboud University Medical Center in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, and a principal investigator at the Donder Center for Cognitive Neuroimaging. In 2015, he worked as a research fellow at the National Institute of Health in the Human Motor Control section headed by Dr. Hallett. Dr. Helmich specializes in movement disorders with a specific focus on tremor disorders and Parkinson's disease. His research is focused on three different topics. One, the pathophysiology of tremor. Two, the role of the cerebral compensation in Parkinson's disease. And three, the role of stress in Parkinson's. For his research, he uses functional and structural MRI, nuclear imaging or PET, and neurophysiology. Since 2017, he has headed the Systems Neurology Research Group at the Donder Center for Cognitive Neuroimaging. Welcome, Dr. Helmich.
Thank you very much, Donna. And also thank you, Kim, for sharing this beautiful, personal, very impressive story. I am really excited to be here. So good afternoon, Canada. It's in the evening here in the Netherlands. And I'm very happy to speak about stress, which I think is a very important and very overlooked subject in Parkinson's. So let me start by sharing my screen. So what I will be telling you today is about the effects of stress on Parkinson's disease. I'm a movement disorders neurologist in the Netherlands, so I see many people with Parkinson's. And in the other half of my time, I'm a researcher, and my mission is really to get an insight into what goes or what happens in the brain of people with Parkinson's, and if we can somehow change the progression of Parkinson's disease. The work that I will be presenting today largely comes from two people in my team, Anouk van der Heijden, who's a postdoc in my team, and Francisca Goltz, who's a PhD candidate. So stress plays a very large role in our society, and it has done so for many decades. So the time cover on the left is actually from the 80s. And today I will be telling you about the effects of stress on Parkinson's symptoms. I will also tell a bit about what stress does to our brain. Many people ask me, does stress cause the onset of Parkinson's disease? So did I get Parkinson's disease because of a lot of stress? I will be discussing that. And I will also be discussing if stress alters the course of Parkinson's disease. So if stressed people have a more rapid Parkinson's disease than people who are less stressed. And finally, I will end with some treatments for stress. So I think many of you already know that stress has a large role on your symptoms. And this is a video of a man with Parkinson's disease who has rest tremor. And when he's just relaxed, you see that he has a rest tremor, a little bit of his right foot and also of his right hand. But when I ask him to do difficult mental calculations, what I see is that the tremor increases quite dramatically. And that happens in almost every person with Parkinson's disease who has tremor. The same can be said about other symptoms. For example, many people with Parkinson's experience that their freezing of gait becomes much worse when they are stressed, or that their dyskinesias are worse when they are stressed. What is a problem is that the dopaminergic medication that many people with Parkinson's disease are taking appears to be less effective when people are stressed. So this is a study that we did where we looked at the severity of tremor, which is the value you see on the vertical axis during rest and during stress, and when people were taking their dopaminergic medication and when they were not. And what you see is that the difference between the blue and the yellow bar becomes smaller when people are stressed, meaning that the medication is less effective in reducing the tremor when people are stressed. And that is a problem in daily life because many people with Parkinson's suffer most from their tremor in stressful situations. We also know from clinical observations that people can actually reduce some of their symptoms by using meditation techniques. So this is a man with Parkinson's disease who has a lot of dyskinesias, and he has learned to meditate in order to control his dyskinesias. So here what you see is that he is doing his meditation exercise, and the dyskinesias become less, which I think is very impressive. So now the dyskinesias are almost gone. You can almost think that the video is not running anymore, but it still is. So to get more knowledge about how stress affects Parkinson's disease, we have done a very large study, a questionnaire study on 5,000 people with Parkinson's disease living in the United States, and asking them about their experiences with stress and also with ways to reduce stress. And when we ask these people, what is the effect of stress on your symptoms? Can you indicate if the symptoms get worse or whether they improve? For all of the symptoms we asked about, the responses were very much to the left, meaning that patients, almost all of them, indicated that these symptoms worsen a lot during stress. So what is stress and how does it affect our brain? So this is just an illustration of what stress does. You see a deer attacked by an alligator, and the stress response allows the deer to immediately jump away. So stress is actually, in normal circumstances, a very good thing. It helps us to cope with challenging situations in our environment. When we look at what stress does to the brain, we see that it activates large parts of the brain. So this was a study where healthy people were investigated in the MRI scanner while they were watching a neutral movie or a very stressful movie. And what you see is that during the stressful movie, there is a lot more activity in the brain than during the neutral movie. Stress also has an effect on the dopamine system. So this is a dot scan of a healthy person on the left and someone with Parkinson's disease on the right. And what you see is the typical loss of dopaminergic cells on the right side, leading to a loss of dopamine in the basal ganglia. If we now look at the effects of stress on the dopamine system, we see that stress actually leads to a release of dopamine in the basal ganglia. And that release of dopamine is necessary because it makes us flexible and it allows us to cope with stress, for example, to jump away like this deer. But in people with Parkinson's disease who have very little dopamine and who have very little dopamine left, stress can actually squeeze out the very last drops of dopamine that are available on that moment, causing people to have a deficit of dopamine, which makes symptoms worse. And the other thing that stress does to our brain is that it activates the noradrenaline system, which is a system that projects to many, many brain regions and increases the excitability of these brain regions. So sometimes people ask me what type of stress is worse. So are there really differences between the types of stress? For example, dealing with conflicts, dealing with times pressure or social stress or worrying. And that is really not the case. So when we asked these 5,000 people, they noted very similar effects of these different types of stress. What is interesting, though, is that many people also said that when they did something that they enjoyed, which is the bottom panel, is that their symptoms actually got better. And that is also what we see, that if people are in a kind of flow state or doing something they really enjoy, like exercise, the example that Kim gave, their symptoms can actually get better. So far I've talked a lot about the effects of acute stress, but what is more dangerous is the chronic stress. So when the stress comes and goes, then that is fine. It is part of daily life. But what is more disturbing is when people have chronic stress. And unfortunately, many people with Parkinson's disease live with chronic stress. And that can lead to symptoms, for example, anxiety or depression. And if we look at the prevalence of anxiety and depression in people with Parkinson's disease, we see that about 30 to 40% of patients suffer from these two symptoms. And that is much more than in healthy people. And it is also much more than in people living with other chronic diseases. And chronic stress has negative effects on the brain. So this is a summary of what chronic stress does to the brain. And what you see, if you look at the picture on the right, the blue areas are areas that actually grow when people are under stress. And these are regions such as the amygdala that are important for anxiety and for fear. And the orange areas are areas that actually reduce their activity and that shrink a bit under stress. And these are areas, for example, the hippocampus, which is important for memory, and the frontal cortex, which is important for thinking and reasoning. So having prolonged periods of chronic stress, well, we should try to prevent that. So one question that I get a lot is, does stress affect the onset of Parkinson's disease? And this is a letter that an Irish patient that I'm treating with Parkinson's disease sent me just before she came to my hospital for a second opinion. And she said, the reason I wanted your opinion in the first instance was to be able to discuss the possibility that I may have a psychogenic form of Parkinson's disease. Why I think this is because on the day following a very traumatic experience, when my husband had a heart attack while abroad, the tremor began. And this is such an impressive story that we have recorded a conversation with this lady, and have also published her story in the Journal of Parkinson's Disease. And the story is called The Last Straw: How Stress Can Unmask Parkinson's Disease. And that comes from the proverb that you probably know, that might just be a tiny final straw that leads to the collapse of a system. And what I think is what stress can do to Parkinson's disease is that it leads to the collapse of this system. So this is the video. It's going to be 3 to 4 minutes. Would you tell us how your first complaints started?
Well, we had arrived in Canada on a very cold, wintry day. The temperature was at -30, and we really rushed out of the airport. The next day, we had a quiet day, recovering from our flight, and the day after that, my husband woke up with a very strong pain in his chest. So immediately my daughter called the ambulance, and it was bringing him to hospital. It appeared he was having a serious heart attack. He had got so far that he had become unconscious, and we were with him because we thought perhaps he would have to be revived. And that was extremely stressful. But in fact, after 2 or 3 minutes, he suddenly sat up and said, "Where am I?" And the worst was over. But of course, he was still seriously ill. So the following day, I was visiting him again with my daughter. I noticed my foot was shaking and my hand. I thought, it's very, very cold. It's still -30. It's to be expected. And the next day, the same thing happened. And this tremor didn't seem to go away.
So you mentioned that your tremor on your right arm and your right foot started the day after your husband, Mervyn, had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Has the tremor since then been away for a longer period, or has it been with you
The tremor
all along?
has been with me in various guises since that time. With medication, it becomes less, but when the medication wears off, it raises its ugly head again.
Yeah.
And with stress,
yeah,
it always is much, much worse.
Yeah. In hindsight, if you go back to the period before 2011,
yeah,
do you recall any slowing of your handwriting or of typing or of your
no,
walking?
I don't really. No, I was doing everything then that I'm able to do. So
yeah,
I was going to the gym. I was doing all sorts of things.
Nothing that now you know you have Parkinson's that remind you of Parkinson's symptoms?
No, not that I can think of.
No. And the event that Helen just told us about actually happened to you, right, in Canada.
And of course, the first thing is, I am responsible for the Parkinson's.
Yes. that's what you thought.
Well, naturally. Yeah. When you've been married and you are so long, you suddenly think, if it were not for my heart attack, the Parkinson's would not have developed.
Yeah.
But of course, that's a naive thought.
Yeah. And the symptoms that you have seen over the last, well, more than 10 years now, in hindsight, were any of these symptoms present before you had the heart attack?
No, they were not at all. There was no suggestion of anything like this at all. There's obviously this suggestion that we become older.
Yeah, so why I find this video so impressive is for many reasons. So first, the lady herself, she thought that she had a psychogenic form of Parkinson's disease because it started so suddenly after this very stressful event. And also because Melvin, her husband, felt guilty for a long period because he thought that the Parkinson's disease started because of his heart attack. And I hear these stories more often. So another example is that some patients experience that they develop Parkinson's disease after a bad COVID period. And many people ask whether this COVID could have caused their Parkinson's disease. And in all of these cases, I think that the Parkinson's disease is not caused by the stress, but is unmasked by the stress. So if we look at healthy people who are followed for a very long period, until some of them get the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, so that is the vertical black line, we see that already many years before they get that diagnosis, they already start to get some symptoms, some slowing, some form of tremor. So Parkinson's disease lingers for a very long period before it is diagnosed. If we look at other symptoms, for example, the loss of smell, or living out your dreams, REM sleep behavioral disorder, or things like constipation, you can see in these studies that many of these symptoms start already, well, 20 years before the diagnosis is made. So that means that Parkinson's disease is already going on in the brain for a very, very long time before it actually emerges. And I think that a stressful event can unmask this, probably by abolishing compensatory mechanisms that keep the system, keep the brain intact for a long time. The other question is, does stress affect the course of Parkinson's disease? So is stress bad for your brain? Well, there's not a lot of evidence from people living with Parkinson's disease, but there is some evidence from animal models. And for example, in mice, the injection of a neurotoxin leads to Parkinson's in those mice. And if that injection of that toxin is combined with a prolonged period of stress to the mice, you see that fewer dopamine cells actually survive. So that suggests that Parkinson's disease combined with stress might be bad for the dopaminergic system. However, I have to say that there's no such evidence in humans. So if this also plays a role in humans, we don't know. And there are a few studies going on to investigate this, also in my lab. So the mission that I have with my research is to investigate how chronic stress influences the dopamine system, and what are the mechanisms that drive this influence, if that is inflammation or if it's an activity of cerebral stress networks. And if we better understand that, we can hopefully do something about that. So how do we reduce stress in Parkinson's disease? So I told you that during stress, the noradrenaline system is very much activated in Parkinson's. And we thought, well, if that is the case, then what we could do is try to inhibit this noradrenaline system by giving propranolol, which is a beta blocker that inhibits the noradrenaline system. And we looked at the effects of propranolol or placebo on tremor in 30 people who had a lot of tremor and Parkinson's. And what we did is we tested the effect of stress and rest on tremor. So on the vertical axis, you see the tremor severity. The gray blocks are the blocks where people were stressed by giving them difficult mental arithmetic. And the white blocks were periods where people were relaxed. And what you clearly see is that during the gray blocks, the tremor gets much worse. And the same is observed for pupil diameter, which is a sign of stress. So the pupil diameter increases during stress, and heart rate. And when we looked at the effect of propranolol, we saw that propranolol reduces tremor in different contexts. So at rest, when stretching out the arms, as compared to the placebo condition. So what I do, what I tell patients who suffer a lot from tremor and who are stressed, is that propranolol might help to reduce the impact of stress on their tremor. The other thing that receives a lot of attention is non-pharmacological interventions, such as mindfulness or meditation that Kim also told us about, which can help to live in the present moment, and which can also help to reduce stress. We also asked these 5,000 people that I mentioned if they had any experience with mindfulness. And about 1,000 of them had experience with mindfulness and mentioned that it was quite effective in reducing many of their symptoms. So here the green bars are to the right, meaning that symptoms were improved by mindfulness, such as anxiety, depression, tremor, freezing, sleep problems, etc. About 40% of the whole group had some experience with mindfulness, 60% did not. And out of these 40%, 93% would also recommend it to other people. And if we looked at the differences between people who practiced a lot of mindfulness, so these are people on the right who practice it several times per day, or people who practice a little mindfulness, so these were people on the left who practice it once a month or less, we saw that people who practice it a lot had more advantages of mindfulness on their symptoms. So that's why they were higher in this curve. There's also some studies looking into this using randomized controlled trials. And what these studies generally see is that people who were randomized to a mindfulness intervention, in this case, it was a mindfulness and yoga combination, had lower levels of anxiety and depression, and also less severe motor symptoms than people who were randomized to a control condition. So here that was a stretching and resistance training. I have to say that there's a lot of stress reducing strategies. When we ask people what reduces stress in their daily life, many Parkinson patients mention physical exercise and physiotherapy, but also relaxation exercises. It doesn't have to be mindfulness. So as far as we know now, stress-reducing interventions such as mindfulness, but also physical exercise, are very effective in improving motor and non-motor symptoms in people living with Parkinson's. One video that I'm not going to show you today, but that is very impressive, so I would invite you to have a look on YouTube, is by a Dutch jazz musician. He's quite famous, René van Helstingen, who has Parkinson's disease, is very open about it, and who has made this beautiful video in English telling us the story of how he copes with the stress in his music, and how he sometimes actually uses the tremor to help him in his improvisation. And I think this is a beautiful example of, well, the resilience that people have and what people can do themselves to make their lives better when coping with stress and Parkinson's. So like I told you, in my research, I'm trying to understand this influence of chronic stress on Parkinson's disease, and also to break this vicious cycle by doing intervention trials. So one large study that we're doing at the moment in the Netherlands is the MIND-PD study, where we randomize people to either a mindfulness intervention or normal treatment as usual, and investigate what the effects are on their brains using MRI imaging and also on their clinical symptoms. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to pass the ball back to Donna, who will be handling the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Helmich. We often hear people say they believe their Parkinson's was brought on by stress. I find it really interesting to know that earlier or prolonged stress in someone's life doesn't cause Parkinson's, but rather that stress will stop how our bodies have been compensating and unmasks the symptoms. We are going to jump right into some really great questions that we've received. The first one is for Dr. Helmich. Is Parkinson's stress different than normal stress?
No, I think it is, the stress is the same. But I do think that people with Parkinson's disease have more risk of becoming stressed because they have to cope with more challenges. And I also think that the Parkinson's disease might affect the coping strategies that people have to deal with the stress. So if you are suffering from motor problems, it might be less easy to go for a run or a swim to cope with the stress than if you do not have these motor symptoms. So I think the stress is the same, but people with Parkinson's disease are more at risk to develop it, and they're difficult to cope with.
Okay. Kim, have you noticed any difference from the way that you experience stress now living with Parkinson's compared to when you were younger?
I would definitely agree with Dr. Helmich with regards to last fall when I was having so many problems getting around. It made exercise for me much, much more challenging to do because I was in so much discomfort. But I knew it was a double-edged sword. I knew I had to do the exercise to slow down the Parkinson's and make my life more manageable. But at the same time, the Parkinson's was making exercise more challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. It's like walking that tightrope of which way it's going to affect your stress and your symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Helmich, is the stress from drugs or perhaps looking at factors of what may come up in the future?
Yeah, I think the stress in Parkinson's disease is really caused by the disease itself and not by the drugs. So it is the loss of dopamine, the loss of well, the effect of Parkinson's disease on the brain that causes the stress. There's one exception maybe, and that is that some people who have severe on-off fluctuations can experience a lot of stress during these off periods. So when the effects of the drug wear off, and when they feel that their body is going into an off state again.
Mm-hmm.
There you could say the stress is caused by the combination of Parkinson's disease and the wearing off of that drug.
Okay, fair enough. Another question for you. Can stress and depression start a year or two ahead of any clinical signs of Parkinson's?
Yes. Yes, that is very clear. So many people that I see, that I ultimately diagnose with Parkinson's disease, tell me that they suffered from burnout or depression a few years earlier. And I think that is caused by the fact that even though there might not be overt symptoms of tremor or slowness, in those years before the diagnosis, people know that something is not quite right, and they have to work harder to keep up. And that is very stressful. So yes, it certainly does.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Question for Kim. Actually, it's a comment and a question. Someone wanted to thank you for sharing your story, and they're asking about your journey with DBS and how did you come to the decision to have DBS? And was it in consultation with your neurologist?
Yes, last April, my neurologist had suggested that DBS surgery might be an option to look at. And I knew by that point things had been accelerating. So yes, I decided we were going to go down that path. And from there, she referred me to Toronto Western Hospital, and I went through their intake program to be accepted into the program.
Okay, thank you. Another one for you. You've got some great strategies for managing your stress throughout the day. And do you find that stress can still affect your sleep at night? Like when you're not actively trying to manage it? Like when you're asleep, you're obviously not using strategies. And if so, what do you do about that?
I'm going to talk before DBS surgery and I'm going to talk after DBS surgery because I will admit the DBS surgery has helped my sleep. In fact, I get a very good sleep now. Prior to the DBS surgery, yes, my sleep was very much affected. And how did I deal with it? That's when I would start to do my gratitude and my prayers. So I really focused on recounting my day, what had happened to me during the day that I was grateful for, that I was positive about. And it could have been the smallest of things that, my husband came home with some, whatever. I can't think of an example right now, but either way, I focused on my positives all the time. I would often go out to our couch and sleep on the couch so I wouldn't disturb my husband. But I took that quiet time just to listen to. Luckily, we have some big windows that look out, and I could see the sky. And I just tried to do some deep breathing techniques. I put on meditation tapes on my phone and listened to meditation tapes on my phone. Just things that would just bring my anxiety and my stress levels down.
Great, thank you. Dr. Helmich, Someone's asking, how effective are anti-anxiety medications for
Yes.
Parkinson's?
Mhm. So I think anti-anxiety medications are very effective in helping with a clinical diagnosis of anxiety or depression. So that is not the case for the majority of Parkinson patients. So many patients are in between that category of people who are clinically depressed or clinically have an anxiety disorder. They're not there, but they still have complaints of worrying, of rumination, of stress levels. And I think not everyone needs to be treated with anti-anxiety medications. So if you are in that in-between category, I think lifestyle changes are probably more effective. But if there's severe symptoms, then please see a psychiatrist. And I think medication is a good option for those people.
Okay, now I'm not sure about in the Netherlands, but in Canada, marijuana has been legalized. And someone's asking about your thoughts for using medical marijuana where it's legal to do so to alleviate stress.
Yeah, so that's a difficult question. So there's a lot of videos on YouTube where people share their experience with marijuana, and some of them they look fabulous. What marijuana does is it makes you a bit drowsy. It reduces stress levels, but it also can make you drowsy. And that also reduces symptoms like tremor or dyskinesias. I don't prescribe marijuana to patients because I think there are other solutions that are more effective on the long term for dealing with stress than marijuana.
Okay, great. Another question about medication. If someone's having stress in their life with Parkinson's, they're asking if it's okay to adjust their medications based on the times of stress.
Yeah, I think that that could well work. So, like I mentioned, stress during stress, medication is less effective, and sometimes people enter a vicious circle. For example, when they are in a restaurant and they experience tremor, and then people are looking at them, and they know that people are looking at them, and they become stressed and they shake even more. And during these times, it could help to take a little more levodopa indeed. The other thing when you need to, well, at least when I think about the role of medication is about these wearing off periods where people really experience severe anxiety when the effect of levodopa wears off. And then I think there are other solutions like long-acting drugs or well, things like DBS, like Kim told us about.
Great. And I do want to add a caveat that if you are experiencing stress and are wanting to consider adjusting your medication, definitely have that conversation with your healthcare provider to make sure that it's appropriate for you in your own particular circumstances. Now, Kim, here's a question for you. As a personal trainer, do you find that working now causes you stress or is an outlet for your stress, or maybe it's both?
It's finding that balance. I had a very, very active business where I was just working too much. And I recognize that now. So, as I said in my talk a little bit earlier, I've become very, very conscious of my boundaries. And I can sense when things are getting a little bit overwhelmed for me. And I'm very cognizant of saying no to things if it's going to be adding too much to my workload. As I said, I started to stop seeing in-person training clients. Now I see only clients online. So I've just learned my boundaries a little bit more, and I'm very cautious about how much I take on.
Okay, super. Thank you. Dr. Helmich, what can you tell us about stress levels and its effect on the care partner? For instance, someone's asking, how do you keep a marriage intact when you become patient and caregiver? And as an aside, I also strongly encourage you to contact Parkinson Canada and inquire about our care partner support programs or our peer-to-peer mentoring program. But Dr. Helmich, what can you say for about stress for care partners?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. I think stress certainly has also plays a large role for caregivers. I think if someone in a relationship gets Parkinson's disease, that is very stressful, not only for that person, but for the relationship as well. I think it is really important to try and keep the relationship going in the sense of continuing to speak with each other. So we offer in our clinic, we sometimes offer couples therapy for the patient and the partner to deal with this stress, because it can be very different, and there are very different types of stress for the patient and for the partner. So yeah, I think that is a very important topic.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question, this is a question that's come from one of our support group facilitators, but it can also be posed for anyone who's a family or a friend of someone with Parkinson's. But how can I support someone experiencing Parkinson's related stress?
That's a question for me.
Yeah, or Kim might have some, like, what would you suggest that can, if you see someone who's got Parkinson's and they're experiencing stress, what can you do to help support them in those moments where they're having that stress? And Kim, you know, from your lived experience, you know, what would help you? Or maybe Dr. Helmich has some suggestions.
First thing I was going to say is listen. Oftentimes the patient, and I'm going to speak for myself, we feel very isolated because nobody else truly can understand what you're going through, the discomfort, the pain, the social isolation, all kinds of things. So I think the best thing is to listen, be empathetic, and let them talk to you on their terms without offering a whole lot of, you can offer some suggestions, but don't force those suggestions. The person has to be willing to take those steps. Sometimes all they need is just somebody to listen to them. It's really all they need.
Dr. Helmich, do you have anything to add?
I think that's a very important advice. That is also what I would give people to listen and to keep communicating about these very difficult but very important issues, and also communicate it with your healthcare providers.
Great. Another question for Dr. Helmich. I've heard that vitamin B12 deficiency may be related to cognitive changes and balance. Is there any evidence it may also impact anxiety or mood?
I think that evidence in Parkinson's disease, to my knowledge, doesn't exist. So vitamin B12 is important for neural function, and it might be reduced by large doses of levodopa or pump therapy. So in pump therapy, it should be monitored. It does not have a specific effect on stress. So it is bad for the brain as a whole if it's much too low, but not specifically for stress or anxiety.
Okay, and last question. Someone's asked if you consume dopamine faster when you're stressed. They find that if they're doing a presentation at work, for example, they feel like they've used up a lot more of it than before. And they think that by increasing their dose before doing that, you know, that presentation or something that's more stressful, it seems to help.
Yeah, so I think that is true. That's a true observation. So people ask me the same question when they do sports. So some people experience that when they do sports, they need a bit more dopamine to do it adequately. And I think that makes sense because ultimately, when we use our brain a lot, when it's active a lot, which is the case during a lot of stress or difficult presentations or during sports, we need more dopamine. So I think there could be some room in doing that. But also here, please discuss this with your healthcare provider.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the time we have today for questions. Special thank you to Dr. Helmich for joining us all the way from the Netherlands to discuss stress and Parkinson's, and to Kim Mortson for so candidly sharing about her own experiences with Parkinson's, stress, and management strategies that have worked for her. Watch your email inboxes for a follow-up email that's going to include a link to a recording of the webinar and any of the resources or other links that were mentioned here today. Of course, you're invited to join us for our next webinar taking place on Wednesday, August 21st from 2 to 3 Eastern, where we will be discussing aging in place with Parkinson's. So watch your email inboxes for more details and the registration link. And a reminder that when the webinar window closes in a moment, please take a brief moment to fill out our short survey, and it helps us plan programming that's relevant to you. On behalf of all of us at Parkinson Canada, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe we'll see you in August.